The Apollo got its beginnings in 1913. Originally, it was solely for white people and named the Burlesque Theater. In 1932, the burlesque was banned and languished for 2 years, until Sidney S. Cohen took on the lease, renaming it the Apollo, which was named after the Greek god of music. This happened at the tail end of the Harlem Renaissance, which was a cultural, social, and artistic explosion within the African American middle class, which also had strong links to the civil rights movement. Cohen decided this would be the first theater to allow African Americans to perform, which was groundbreaking as African Americans were banned from most theaters in the U.S. This is also why the Apollo is often referred to as the place of opportunity. This theater has launched careers such as those of Bill Cosby, Jimi Hendrix, and of course James Brown. James Brown performed there more than anyone else, and when he died, they even brought his body back ahead of his funeral. Brown's album came out at the end of an era of desegregation and the Civil Rights Act of the 1960s. African Americans began to be welcomed into other establishments, and the Apollo's competition increased and was bankrupt by the mid-1970s. In the 1980s, Percy Sutton saved it. He realized that the small capacity of 1,500 seats barely covered costs and would not survive as a commercial establishment. So in 1991, the state of New York acquired the theater, and a nonprofit foundation was organized to run it. Simultaneously, the venue was given a 99-year lease at a cost of $1 per year. Local musician Swave Siva said, "If you played there, your career would have took off. I don't think that is the case anymore. The young generation just don't appreciate it the way we did." Before the Apollo, one of the ways African Americans could perform and make money was on the Chitlin Circuit. The stroll of cities where bars, food, and barbershops were turned on Saturday nights into a place of entertainment. Not everyone went out, but many people did, in search of entertainment they were likely to find, and the performers looking to make names for themselves. While some people did other forms of art, the main focus of the African American community and the average entrepreneur in the 1930s was thinking in terms of entertainment. This is where James Brown practiced and was able to refine his performance skills before he famously made his appearance at the Apollo and blew up. This was also one of the only ways African Americans were able to make any money in the industry, as the majority of establishments refused African Americans before the Apollo. James Brown performed about 300 gigs a year. Brown had forged a formidable following, and by the very early 60s was anointed the hardest working man in show business. He earned this through his relentless efforts to perform for his fans and never wavering energy. The man worked his shows, as they said. James Brown was quoted as saying, "Any artist, if he's really got his act together, his live show will be twice as good as the record." This led Brown to want to record and release a live record. King Records, who Brown was a part of, thought that a live record was a bad idea, saying, "If a live album is available in record stores, why go to the gigs?" Brown rented out the Apollo himself, which cost him $5,700 of his own money, which equates today to about $70,000. If he failed in this concert, basically he was personally done. They decided to record live on a Wednesday night, which was their fifth night of playing at the Apollo, and dangled microphones over the crowd to catch their interactions with the music. Brown forced Nathan, the owner of King Records, to buy the tapes from him and refused to allow the record company to take any parts out of what they recorded as the live concert to sell as a single. He was firm that it was to be sold the way it was. Radio DJs, by demand from the people, played the album in full. This concert and this album catapulted Brown up the charts to the number 2 album on pop charts, attracting the much coveted white fans. The crossover to mainstream music happened mostly as a result of Elvis. However, that doesn't mean that Elvis was the creator of rock and roll. Little Richard said, "The blues had an illegitimate baby and we named it rock and roll. No one person can claim to have created this style. Rock and roll was influenced by deep South black music genre called the blues. Rock and roll, started out as rhythm and blues," Little Richard told Time in 2001. "There wasn't nobody playing it at the time but black people. Myself, Fats Domino, Chuck Berry. White kids started paying more attention to this music. White girls were going over to this music. They needed somebody to come in there, like Elvis." Sister Rosetta Tharpe was the first one who can claim to have created that rock and roll sound, who made the crossover between gospel music to rock and roll, and had a major impact on artists like Elvis. Presley, by all accounts, was quick to acknowledge his debt to African American performers. By playing multiracial music for multiracial audiences, he helped to point the path away from segregation. James Brown had a difficult childhood as he grew up in poverty. When he was a kid, he was forced to drop out of school as a result of wearing insufficient clothing. This ignited his passion for advocating for education as he became more popular. It was even noted that he would meet youngsters at the Apollo, and one of the things he would consistently ask the kids was about their grades. When he would see them again, if they had improved grades, he would even give some of them money. The things he was passionate about, such as education and other social matters, were apparent in his songs. He was not afraid to express his stance on things such as the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement. He knew this could hurt his fan following, but that didn't stop him from showing his stance. At the time of Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination, he gave a live televised concert in Boston to try to stop the riots that were occurring there. Boston officials credit him with saving Boston because rather than rioting, many people stayed home to watch his concert. The way James Brown performed was electrifying. His unique style was something that people had not experienced before and certainly hadn't heard from an African American male before. Before the Apollo Theater, which was open to everyone, including African Americans, there was little exposure in mainstream music to African American artists such as James Brown. With a twist of his own style, he took off as an artist. The fact that radio DJs were playing his full album on air was amazing in itself. He had the special ability to relate to his audiences and project his energy onto them. As you can see in his live performance at the Apollo, as he is singing Night Train, he is even encouraging the audience to chant along with him and asking if they are ready for the night train. This goes beyond the usual artist performing and the audience listening. He had the ability to engage the audience and make them as excited about the music as he was. The entire crowd is cheering and smiling along with him. The color of their skin didn't matter. That was what was so special about his style of music, is that he was able to unify large audiences of all races directly following things such as desegregation. For that brief glimpse in time, during his concert, there was no skin color, socioeconomic status, or social status in general. For that time, everyone was one, and the main focus was on James Brown's performance. One piece of interesting information I came across during my research was from the movie Rocky IV. James Brown is shown performing his song Living in America before an exhibition fight for Apollo Creed. I'm not sure if this was by coincidence or was intentional by the director that James Brown was performing for Apollo in this scene, because James Brown was a repeat performer at the Apollo Theater. My questions to you are, first, are there any artists today that you would relate to James Brown in terms of their performance as well as their social activism? And do you think Brown's legacy had an influence on this person? Also, what stands out to you the most as to why Brown was so successful as a performer? And second, Swave Siva said, if you played there, meaning the Apollo, your career would have took off. I don't think that this is the case anymore. The young generation just don't appreciate it the way we did. Do you agree with his statement that the Apollo and furthermore live music venues do not get the same respect as they did in James Brown's time? If you agree, what do you think the reasoning for this is? If you disagree, what is one venue that comes to mind as iconic, aside from the Apollo, and explain why it is iconic?